Okay, welcome back to all of you guys. Nice to see everyone here. Welcome to everyone online as well. I'm going to share this topic of the 5 precepts with you guys. It's a householder's guide to daily practice. These are 5 impactful decisions that the Buddha is going to help you to understand how to make wise decisions to experience wholesome results. Yesterday, I was teaching the Eightfold Path. These 5 precepts plug into the Eightfold Path. So whenever you're learning things like this from the Buddha, it's important to understand that he's teaching you the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result. He's not teaching you rules or commandments. He's not telling you what you should or shouldn't be doing in your life. Those are choices for you to make. I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't do in your life. You're an adult. Even if you were a child, it's still your decisions. It's not up to me to tell you how to live your life. Instead, what I'm doing here in this talk and all the others that I share is just helping you to understand the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect, or action and result, because it's your life, it's your decisions, and it's your results. But what the Buddha is teaching you in these 5 precepts is wise decision making that is going to lead to wholesome results in your life. But whether you choose to do things that way or not, it's totally up to you. In fact, what these 5 precepts are doing is it's helping you to eliminate craving, anger, and ignorance. I'll show you that as we go through the talk. I'll show you how each one of these teachings are helping to eradicate a certain amount of craving, anger, and ignorance in your mind. And just like always, you guys are welcome to ask any and all questions as we go. But just keep in mind that this is what the Buddha is teaching you, is the natural law of Kamma, this cause and effect, or action and result. So here's the first precept, using the words of the Buddha. Abandoning the taking of life, refraining from taking life, without stick or sword, diligent, compassionate, trembling for the welfare of all living beings. So whenever you're studying the teachings of the Buddha, remember you're investigating his teachings. You're never believing anything. So sometimes you need to even investigate vocabulary in order to understand, because sometimes people use vocabulary in different ways, right? Not everybody agrees that a particular English word means a certain thing. We all have different definitions. So sometimes it's helpful to just investigate some of the vocabulary. So here, when you're learning a teaching like this, you're not just believing it. The Buddha's not teaching you black and white. He's not teaching you preserve all life at all cost. He's teaching you to live compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. Well, the first thing you would do if you're investigating this is, what is a living being? Don't even assume that you know what a living being is, right? Start at the very beginning. So the Buddha taught a teaching called the 5 aggregates, which determines what is a living being. You might think of this as like 5 criteria, or 5 elements, or some people refer to them in that way, or 5 collections, 5 things that determine what is a living being. He talks about form, feeling, perceptions, volitional formations, and a consciousness. These are the 5 things that determine what is a living being. A living being is going to have physical form. And remember, you can reflect on this as I'm sharing it with you. You can independently verify it because you know you're a living being. A living being is going to have physical form, right? Every living being is going to have physical form. We have physical structures. A living being is going to have feelings, like the pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, anger, sadness, frustration, things like this. Then a living being is going to have perceptions. What perceptions are your views and opinions about the world, the way you look out at the world, certain views and opinions. Then a living being is going to have volitional formations, which are choices and decisions. They're going to have free will. They're going to be able to make their own decisions in life. And then a living being is going to have a consciousness, which is the mind itself. So a living being is going to have physical form, feelings, perceptions, volitional formations, which are choices and decisions, and they're going to have a consciousness. This is a definition that's held up for 2,500 years, right? So you can take any living being that you know to be a living being, and you can see they have all 5, whether it's a human being or a squirrel or a rabbit or a bird or any of these kinds of things. They all have all 5 aggregates. But then don't just stop there in your investigation of this and your independent verification. Take something that you know is not a living being and try to see if it holds up to this. So this chair that I'm sitting in, does it have physical form? It does, right? It has physical form. Does it have feelings? Does it get angry or sad? No, it doesn't have that. Does it have perceptions? Does it have views and opinions about the world? Doesn't have those. Does it have volitional formations, choices and decisions? Can it choose to pick itself up, walk down the street and put itself back down? Can't do that. Does it have a mind or a consciousness? doesn't have one of those, right? So you can see that this chair is not a living being, right? So one of the shorthand ways to think about this as you're making your way to understanding the 5 aggregates is that if a being comes from an egg, a sperm, and it has a consciousness, then it's a living being. But there's some rare situations where there is a living being that doesn't come from an egg and a sperm. They're all going to have a consciousness. So I teach you this just as like a shorthand way to think of it for now. But ultimately, you would like to learn the 5 aggregates and make sure you understand what that is so that you can clearly see what is a living being and what's not a living being. That's the natural law. That's what the Buddha taught, is the 5 aggregates. This is just like a little shorthand way, just while you're starting to learn the 5 aggregates and getting to know those more closely. So because of this, the 5 aggregates, you can see that plants, bacteria, viruses, things like this, they're not living beings. But the challenge is that in the unenlightened state, we will use words and language that doesn't really represent true reality. So we will say things like, oh, don't kill that tree. Or we might say, I'm going to take this antibiotic and I'm going to kill this bacteria in the body. Well, if you understand the 5 aggregates, you can see that these things aren't a living being. We're using language that doesn't really represent true reality. What we're doing is we're not killing the tree. We're harvesting it. It's a plant. It doesn't have all 5 aggregates. We're not killing the bacteria because it's not a living being. We're eliminating it from the body. So you can see through the 5 aggregates that these things aren't living beings, but you can also see it through the natural law of Kamma. Because what the Buddha is teaching you is this natural law of cause and effect. And whenever you're causing harm to a living being, harm is going to come back to you. So if you killed another human being, you're going to experience harm because of that. But if you harvest a tree, you're not going to experience any harm. Or if you eliminate a bacteria from the body, you're not experiencing harm. You're experiencing a wholesome result. If that was a living being and I was killing a living being by eliminating that bacteria, I would experience an unwholesome result. But you're actually experiencing a wholesome result when you eliminate that bacteria. So you're going to need to be able to see what is a living being and what isn't a living being. And a living being is going to have these 5 aggregates. Because what the Buddha is teaching you is to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. And you're going to need to know what is a living being in order to be able to live compassionately towards it. Now, of course, it's wise to treat the planet well, right? And we don't just go around and like rip down trees and rip out plants and stuff like this. We've learned that if we're going to harvest a tree, we need to plant 5 or 10 more. Right? That's the problem that we ran into, that we were harvesting and we weren't planting. And that was the difficulties that our environment experienced. But now that we know that, now when we harvest and plant, there's no issues, that we can grow more and more plants and we have oxygen and things in the world that can help us to be able to live and sustain our life. So our words in the unenlightened state are oftentimes saying things that don't represent true reality. Like we say, don't kill that plant, or I'm going to kill this plant. You're not actually killing it. You're just harvesting it. Right. So when we went to, I think it was just this past weekend, where we started to do some work out in the temple area, and there were some students that came up to me and said, what are we going to do with these plants? Aren't we killing them if we pull the weeds? And I was like, no, you're not killing the plants. You're actually just eliminating them, and they're not a living being. You can pull them without causing any harm. And you can see this through the natural law of Kamma. Okay. But then you're going to need to ask yourself, if you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, are you interested in participating in any of these kinds of things, like euthanasia of a human or animal, termination of pregnancy, suicide, assisted suicide, capital punishment, war, government-sponsored killing, and murder? These are all intentional killings, but whether you choose to actually do this or not is going to be different in each situation. This isn't black and white. I'm not going to teach you any kind of thing that's black and white, because that's not what the Buddha is teaching you. He's not teaching you anything black and white here. He's not saying preserve all life at all costs. He's saying live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. So I'm going to give you some examples here using these things, where in some situations it could potentially be wise and it will produce wholesome Kamma. In other situations it could be unwise and it will produce unwholesome Kamma. So let me start with this one here of termination of a pregnancy. Now, some people think about this as a political discussion about whether termination of pregnancy should be legal or illegal. That's not what what I'm talking about. I don't dive into politics. This is a human issue. We have this technology to be able to terminate a pregnancy, and in some cases it could be helpful, and in other cases it could actually be harmful, depending how someone chooses to use it. But ultimately, if someone chooses to use it, it's their choice. It's not my choice. In fact, if someone came to me and asked me whether they should terminate a pregnancy or not, I wouldn't tell them yes or no. I would say, if you terminate your pregnancy, here's what you'll experience. And if you don't terminate it, this is what you experience. And they are up to them to make their own decision. But let me just help you to be able to see in situations where this could be beneficial, but in other situations it may not be. If I had a womb, which obviously I don't, if I was a female and I had a fetus inside my womb and the doctor shared with me, hey, we can know through medical technology that this fetus is not going to grow and develop and mature, and it's not going to live a viable life outside the womb. And by having it inside the womb, it's threatening your life and you could die at any time. I recommend that you terminate the pregnancy. Well, in this situation, if the individual chose to terminate the pregnancy, they're going to experience wholesome results in that situation. If they're going to live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, that compassion has to start with themselves. Compassion is the concern for the misfortune of others. So I wouldn't be having compassion for all living beings if I chose to allow this fetus inside the womb to continue to grow when we know that it's not going to live a viable life outside the womb and it's threatening my life. So in this situation, a woman might choose to terminate her pregnancy, but it's up to her whether she chooses to do that or not. But then say in another situation, say I'm sexually promiscuous, I'm having sex with lots of different people, I'm getting pregnant, every 3 months, once a year, something like this. And now I'm using termination of pregnancy in order to help me with birth control. And now maybe 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 times I'm terminating a pregnancy. In this situation, it's going to cause harm to my own body because every time I have an abortion or this termination of pregnancy, it's going to cause harm to the body. And now I'm going to experience the unwholesome results from that because now I'm regularly killing. Where in a situation where it's a fetus that isn't going to live a viable life outside the womb, that's kind of like a once in a lifetime situation that those kinds of things happen. And now someone might terminate a pregnancy in that situation. But again, whether someone chooses to do that or not, it's totally up to them. It's their choice. But you can see the Buddha here isn't teaching preserve all life at all costs. That's not what he's teaching you. He's saying live compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Let's take some other ones here. Let's just say that I had termites in my house, and this actually really did occur, that we had termites at our house and it was eating our structures in our house. If you allow these beings to continue to eat that structure, you're not living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because me, my wife, my son, we're going to be out of the house. We're not going to have anywhere to live. We can't just go buy another house and donate this house to these termites to be able to eat. But unfortunately, these termites, lacking the level of consciousness that a human being has, they don't understand the difference between eating this house and eating wood outside in the forest. Because for us, if we needed wood to eat, we would go to the forest where it doesn't bother anybody and we would eat that wood instead of this person's house. But this insect doesn't have that level of consciousness, so they're eating this wood. So to live compassionately, we need to eradicate these termites in some way. So what we did is we researched on the internet to see if we can eradicate them in some way without actually killing them and harming them. And what we came back with is right now there is no way to do that. So we needed to hire somebody. My wife called somebody. They came and they put some food around and they ate this food, took it back to their nest. And over the course of 2 years, it eradicated the termites out of our home. And this was living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings, because we need to have compassion for ourselves. Where in this situation, these termites were causing harm. So now harm came to them, right? They were causing harm, meaning they were damaging someone's material possessions, damaging your physical body, or damaging a reputation. You can cause harm to others, but you can't cause others to be angry or frustrated or sad or anything like this. If someone's experiencing that, that's their own mind that's causing that through what we were talking about earlier, craving, desire, attachment, this longing and yearning. So in this situation, we lived compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. We weren't interested in causing harm to these termites, but unfortunately, based on where we are in the world, there's no way to get rid of them other than to do that. And this was the harm that they were experiencing because they were choosing to cause harm. And that's the difficulty of being in the animal world, is they don't have the level of consciousness to realize to go out into the woods and eat the wood and nobody would disturb them. So there's going to be situations like these that you're going to need to think through this compassion and living compassionate for the welfare of all living beings. This particular natural law that we're talking about, the natural law of Kamma, it's functioning at a much higher level than any human laws. Because in a human situation, your government could tell you, hey, we would like you to go to war. Let's go to war with that country over there. We would like you to go kill those people over there. And if you go kill those people over there, we're completely fine with that. But if you come over here to our land and you kill people in our land, we're going to arrest you for murder. This is a government. These are human laws that people would say this. But you can't escape the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. If you went off into war and you're causing harm, this harm can easily come back to you. You can get injured. You can get brain trauma. You can get killed yourself. Oftentimes people who go to war, they get addicted to drugs and alcohol and substances. When they come back home, they have a hard time integrating it back into society. These are all the things that you experience as a result of having gone off into war and killing other people. Again, whether someone chooses to do this or not, it's their choice. I'm not here to tell somebody what they should or shouldn't do. I'm just helping you to be able to see the natural law of Kamma, of cause and effect. And no matter what a government says to you, you can't escape the effects of the natural law of Kamma. So this is where each individual needs to decide for themselves, is it wise for them to go off into war and kill or not? Because you will be affected by those choices. And that's what the Buddha is helping you to be able to see. So there's other things that you're going to encounter in your day-to-day life with killing, right? That you're going to need to look at whether you're living compassionately for the welfare of all living beings. Sometimes students ask me about something called a DNR. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this. This is called a Do Not Resuscitate Order. This is a legal document that you can put in place where your living relatives know that if this body dies, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. And some people choose that option. And they ask me, they say, hey, David, is this still practicing this precept? And I say, yes, you're still practicing this precept because you haven't killed anybody. You haven't intentionally killed anybody. You're just saying you're comfortable with death. And you're informing your relatives, don't use medical technology to bring me back to life. So if somebody has a DNR, they are still practicing this particular precept. And then sometimes people ask me about defense and protection. They say, what if I'm in my house at 2 a.m. in the morning, I'm sleeping and someone breaks into my window? What should I do? They're coming into my house. And what I share with them is that person's not there to bring you chocolate and flowers. They're there to cause harm. If they're breaking into your window of your house at 2 a.m. in the morning, they're not bringing you chocolate and flowers. They're there to do harm. And what I suggest people to do is, if you can, get out, right? If they would like to break something or steal something, okay, whatever. Just get out, preserve your life, call the police. The police have the tools and the training to deal with that situation. Just get out. But remember, this isn't black and white because you can't always get out. Maybe you look out the window and there's a fire outside, or maybe there's a gang of people out in your front yard. You can't get out of the house. So the Buddha's not giving you like this plug and play, this decision tree that if this happens, do that. If this happens, do that. Because if that was the case, that would be a permanent answer for every single situation, and that just doesn't exist. So moving to this higher consciousness means that you bring in wisdom about the natural law of Kamma, and then you decide in any given situation based on the variables that you're confronted with, what should you do in this situation? So let's just say that you can't get out of this house, and now this person has you backed up against the corner, maybe you and your family. It wouldn't be living compassionately for all living beings to sit there and let them stab you with a knife or beat you up or any other things like this. So in this situation, if you need to defend this being who you are, then do that. What I suggest you do is cause the least amount of harm as possible. If they have a stick, get a bigger stick. right? If you needed to harm this individual, even if you needed to kill them, you're not going to experience unwholesome kamma. That everybody understands this person was there to cause you harm. You had to kill this person. You don't have to feel guilty or shameful in that this is the harm that this person was trying to cause you, and now harm came to them, just like the termites, right? So if you need to defend this being, go ahead and do that. But there's oftentimes situations that we create for ourselves that there's a whole lot of sequence of events, of decisions that we've made that have led to any particular situation. Let's just say that I went out at nighttime, at midnight, 1 a.m., 2 a.m. I went out to a bar where people were drinking and using drugs, and now we're out in the middle of the parking lot. Maybe the bar's closed. We're out in the parking lot at 2 or 3 a.m. in the morning, and now a fight breaks out, and someone punches me and starts stabbing me with a knife. Well, there was a whole sequence of events that led to that, right? It was me choosing to go out late at night. It was me choosing to go to a place where they were using drugs and alcohol. It was me choosing to stick around in the parking lot while people were intoxicated and drunk. And now it's led to this harm that's come to me. So the Buddha teaches us that it's unwise to do these kinds of things. But again, whether you choose to do that or not, your choice. But you can see that there's a whole sequence of events that you can actually avoid a lot of this defense and protection by just making wise decisions of where to go in the world and where to spend your time, and you'll avoid a whole lot of those kinds of situations. Then sometimes people ask me about being vegan and whether or not they need to be vegan in order to practice these teachings closely. Well, if you would like to eat plant-based food, you surely can. And you're going to notice that that's going to help you with your body, the health of your body, because as you're eating meat and animal flesh, it's going to cause illness and sickness in the body. But whether you choose to do that or not, it's up to you. There's research that has been done where they take animals like wild fish that are in clean rivers in places like the USA, and they test the flesh of the fish, and they test to see what's in there. And what they're finding is that there's over 90 different substances that shouldn't be in the fish, that when you're eating that, you're actually ingesting it. Some of the things are like cocaine or antidepressants and things like this, because us humans have been flushing that stuff down into the water table, and now even a wild fish is absorbing that into their meat. And when you eat that meat, you're not just eating the flesh of the animal, you're actually eating the drugs and the hormones and the toxins. Even farmed animals, that farmers nowadays are putting a lot of hormones into their animals in order to grow them quicker so that they can get more profit. And now when you're eating the meat, it's actually affecting the health of your body and the health of your mind. So what you will notice is if you move to a plant-based food supply, you'll notice that there's more health of the body and of the mind. But again, whether you choose to do that or not, it's your choice. At one time, human beings were plant-based eaters. You can see this through scientists and researchers will tell us this, that when we first started as a society, we were all plant-based eaters. But you don't need to believe them because of that. You can look at your teeth and you can see that to be true, that your teeth are actually very similar to a cow or a horse that eats plants, because an animal like a lion or a tiger that eats meat, they usually have really sharp, ripping, tearing teeth. And that's what those types of beings have that eat exclusively meat. So for us, we have more teeth that are like a cow or a horse that eats plants. So whether you choose to move to a plant-based food supply, or if you ever do that, it's your choice, but you will notice improved health of the body and the mind if you choose to do those kinds of things. Do you guys have any questions on this precept? Yes, sir. It just takes a second. It's probably on if the lights are on. Oh, there you go.
Yeah. How do you know that you're actually making a wise decision? And in the example you gave around self-compassion, I think it would be easy to justify selfish or self-serving or easy decisions in the name of self-compassion. And so how do you hold yourself accountable?
Sure. So the way you know whether a decision is wise or unwise is whether it's either a harmless decision or a harmful decision. If you're making a harmless decision, then you're not harming other beings. If it's a harmful decision, then this is an unwise decision. And as long as you're causing harm, harm's going to come back to you. You can cause harm to somebody's material possessions, to their physical body, to their reputation. Those are the types of harms that you can cause. So anytime you're making a harmful decision, it's unwise, and that harm is going to come back to you. So as you learn this natural law of karma more and more closely, you're going to see what are harmful decisions and what are harmless decisions. That's what I'm helping you to see here with the 5 precepts, but it goes even deeper than the 5 precepts. But just in terms of like in general, you would like to look at harm. Are you causing any harm to someone's material possessions, to their physical body, or to their reputation? And anytime you do that, it's going to produce harm, and that harm is going to come back to you. Okay, so let's go to the next one. The next one is the 2nd precept. Here's the words of the Buddha. He says, abandoning the taking of what is not given, living purely, accepting what is given, awaiting what is given, without stealing. So here, the Buddha is definitely teaching you that it's unwise to steal. Because, by the way, we just talked about craving, anger, and ignorance in our previous talk. This previous precept, it's based in craving, anger, and ignorance, right? If somebody goes out to actively, intentionally kill somebody and murders a human being, there's a craving, there's a longing, a yearning, there's anger and ill will in the mind, and that's coming from ignorance, and that's why it's producing unwholesome results. And the same thing here, that if somebody's choosing to steal, there's a certain craving. There's a longing and yearning. It's like, I want that car. I can't afford it myself, and I'm not willing to work in order to buy it myself, so I'm going to steal it from somebody else. There's craving there. There's also ill will, which causing harm to this other being, and it's coming from the ignorance or the unknowing of true reality. So the Buddha teaches us not to steal from other people because it's going to cause harm to others, and then this harm is going to come back to me. So if I stole someone's car, they're not going to be able to get to work. If they have children that they take to school, they're not going to be able to take their children to school. They're not going to be able to go to the store and acquire the basic necessities they need in order to sustain life. I've just caused harm to this individual. And that's why the Buddha is teaching you that it's unwise to do it, because now this harm is going to come back to you. Then if you assume that something can be used, this is also taking what is not given, right? So that if I was, say, in a college class and I had a paper that I was turning into a professor, and the professor was out of the classroom, and I saw a stapler on their desk, and I just grabbed the stapler and I started stapling the paper, well, maybe the professor walks in and they're like, hey, what are you doing? That's my stapler. Like maybe they're attached to their stapler, right? They have a craving for their stapler. Now they get angry and frustrated. They attribute their anger to me, and now they give me an F on the paper. Or maybe they fail me in the whole class, right? Where what I could have done is I could have just asked them, hey, do you mind if I use your stapler? And they're either going to say yes or no. And if they say no, then maybe I just go somewhere else and get a stapler somewhere else. But if I just assume that it could be used, then I might be putting myself in a compromised situation. So the Buddha is teaching you how to navigate the world with these unenlightened beings, right? But remember, this isn't black and white. You need to move to a higher consciousness and think this through. If I was out in my village and one of my neighbors had lacerated their arm and they were bleeding profusely, and they're going to bleed out and die if I don't help them, and now one of my other neighbors has a fabric on their front porch and I see it and I can grab it and go put on a tourniquet, I'm not going to go to my neighbor's door and like ding dong and like sit there and wait till they come to the door and like, by the way, can I borrow your fabric because our neighbor is bleeding out, they're going to die. No, I'm just going to grab the fabric, I'm going to put it on their arm, wrap up a tourniquet, and then when they're headed off in the ambulance, I'm going to go to my neighbor and be like, hey, I'm so sorry, I apologize, I used this fabric on your front porch, I'm really sorry about this, I'd like to replace this for you or give you the money that you need in order to replace it. And then I'm going to have a conversation with this person, right? So it's not black and white. That's not what the Buddha is teaching you. He's teaching you to use your mind to understand that it's unwise generally to take things without asking people. But there's going to be those rare situations where you might need to take something when someone's life is at risk. But now you know, because of the natural law of Kamma, to go talk to your neighbor and make amends and solve this issue. And here's another example of that: accepting what is given. If you're accepting what is given, that means somebody's making an offering to you, they're practicing generosity with you, and now you just accept what is given to you, right? So if grandma is going to give you this sweater at Christmas time or on your birthday, and you look at that sweater and you know that you're never going to wear this sweater ever, the Buddha teaches you to accept it, right? Because this is helping grandma's mind to practice generosity. But now you can practice generosity too. You can give it to somebody else. There's no harm in this. If grandma gets angry that you gave it to someone else, that's her mind causing that, because she had an expectation. She was craving and desiring for you to do it a certain way. And now you didn't meet her expectations and she's getting angry because you gave the sweater away. But all you're doing is practicing generosity. And now this sweater might go through 5, 8, 10 different hands. And eventually someone's going to get that sweater and they're going to look at it. They're going to be like, that's the most beautiful sweater I've ever seen. I'm going to wear that every day of my life, right? So now all these people benefited from practicing generosity. Whereas if you shut down grandma's generosity and you say, no, I don't want that, now grandma doesn't get a chance to enhance the quality of her mind by practicing generosity. And over time, people are going to stop giving you things if you shut down their generosity. But again, this isn't black and white. If someone offered you heroin or crystal methamphetamine, are you going to accept what is given? Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate that. And now you're going to give it to someone else? No. If you see that, it's like, I'm good. Thanks, bud. I'm fine, right? You're not going to accept that. So this isn't black and white. You need to use your higher consciousness and your wisdom to see what's wise or unwise. Here, the Buddha is teaching you to await what is given. What this is that you don't have an expectation for somebody to give you something, right? Like say your life partner is going on a business trip. If you load them up with a bunch of expectations of what you want, now you have this desire, this longing, yearning. They go on this business trip. They're feverishly looking for what it is that you asked them to bring you. And now if they bring you back what you want, you get happy. But if they don't bring you back what you want, you get angry or frustrated. So what the Buddha is teaching you is just await what is given. If someone's going to give you something, then great, they give you something. And if they don't, that's fine too. And this will keep your relationships more harmonious. So do you guys have any questions on the second precept? No questions? Okay, so let's go to the third one. Here, this one also deals with craving, anger, and ignorance, just like the previous two. Here, I'll read it to you, then I'll help you to learn it. He says, abandoning unchastity, abandoning sexual relations with women, men, who are protected by their mother, father, and father, brother, sister, or relatives, who are protected by teachings, who have a husband, wife, or partner whose violation entails a penalty, or even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. So here he's talking about sexual activity, because we can cause harm through our sexual activity or not. It's up to us of what choice that we choose to make. So here, in this first part, he's talking about having sex with minors, an individual who's protected by their family. That's a minor, right? And what the Buddha is teaching you is it's unwise to have sex with someone who's a minor. Because if you've had sex before, you know how impactful that is the first time you have sex. And if you're like 8 years old, 12 years old and having sex, this is really impactful to that person's mind because they're learning and growing, developing with their family. And if you kind of lure them away to have sex, this will really impact their ability to grow and develop in their day-to-day life. By and large, throughout the world, it's the law that someone has to be of a certain age in order to consent to have sex. But there's actually some places in the world where it's legal to have sex with a minor. And you can look at those kinds of places. In the natural law of Kamma is still at play. Those kinds of places, their economy, their social situation, the way that they function in their society, they're having all kinds of difficulties and all kinds of trouble. So even though legally their government has said it's okay to have sex with an 8-year-old child, you can see that their political system, their economic system, their educational system, and other things like this is really not doing well because of the natural law of Kamma. And that's why the Buddha is teaching you this. Then he teaches you up here whose violation entails a penalty. This is sex without consent. This is like raping somebody or forcing them to have sex. And we know if we did that, the cause and effect relationship is that we can get hurt ourselves, right? If we're causing harm to this person, we can get murdered ourselves. Maybe that person murders us, or somebody comes and murders us while we're in the act of raping this person, or we get injured or arrested. These are all things that can happen to us if we choose to cause harm. Here, where the Buddha says abandoning unchastity, what he's talking about there is having sex with multiple partners. If you know what chastity is during ancient times, there was something called a chastity belt. Fathers would put these metal underwear on their daughters, and they had the lock and key, and it was only the father that could unlock this chastity belt. So this woman wouldn't be having sex with anybody because she had metal underwear on. I can't imagine walking around with metal underwear, but apparently people did this. You can see pictures of them on the internet. If you look up chastity belt, you'll see these on the internet. Well, that would be chastity, where you're not having sex with anybody. Unchastity would be just the opposite, where you're having sex with lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of people. And if you're having sex with lots and lots and lots of people, this is where we get sexually transmitted diseases. This is what can occur, right? Because this is the unwholesome result of our unwise decision, the cause and effect. And you can have all kinds of difficulties with this. Sometimes we're in relationships and we're in a culture where maybe we've met somebody, we're planning to get married, but we don't have enough money to afford a house. We might go to our parents and we might say, hey, can such and such move in? We're going to have a relationship. We're going to get married, but right now we can't afford a house. And in this situation, if your parents say, yeah, sure, you guys can move in this situation, they've accepted the relationship. This isn't someone who's protected by their mother, father, brother, sister, and so forth. So in that situation, if you're choosing to have sex, that's your choice. Just like everything else, it's your choice, but you're not going to experience any unwholesome karma in that situation because your parents have chosen to accept this relationship into that home. Here, where the Buddha is talking about who are protected by teachings, what he's talking about there is people who have decided to remain celibate. As part of this path to enlightenment, some people choose to eliminate sexual activity. In order to be able to get to the third and fourth stage of enlightenment, that's what an individual would choose to do. Because as long as you have sexual craving in your mind, you're going to have some degree of discontentedness. When or if you ever choose to eliminate sexual activity, it's your choice. Nobody's going to tell you to do that. Nobody's going to force you to do that. But if you're interested in getting to complete peace and complete joy in the mind, you're going to need to ultimately eliminate sexual activity. Sometimes when we're young, we can't imagine eliminating sexual activity. We can't imagine that there's something better in the world than having sex, but there is. It's called enlightenment. Enlightenment is actually much better than having sex because sex, it's a temporary pleasant feeling that for a few hours or a few days, you'll feel pleasantness. You'll feel that after sex glow, so to speak, but then it's going to wear away. And then there's going to be certain times where you want sex, you can't get it, and you're going to be frustrated or agitated or annoyed. So if you're ultimately going to get to the third and fourth stage of enlightenment, an individual will have decided to let go of all sexual activity. But when or if someone chooses to do this, it's their choice. Oftentimes what people do when they're young is they make their way up to the first and second stage of enlightenment, and they hang out there for a while, doing all the other work that they were planning to do on the path to enlightenment. Because you could be having a sexual relationship and still be in the first and second stage of enlightenment, and your life's going to be pretty peaceful and pretty joyful. But every once in a while, you're going to want to have sex and you can't get it, and you're going to be agitated and frustrated and annoyed. So you could do all that other work while hanging out on that second stage of enlightenment, and then at some point when you and your partner kind of been there, done that, you've had enough sex, you might decide to move on from there. But whether you choose to do that is up to you. In terms of having sex with someone who is celibate, here in Thailand, they make this really easy for you, that people who have like the orange robes and the shaved hair, they're not choosing to have sex with anybody. So that kind of gives you an indication that, you're not interested in having sex with those people. Those are ordained practitioners. Also here in Thailand, people who wear all white each day, they're choosing not to have sex either. They will sometimes shave their hair as well. I wear all white for other reasons. I don't have sex any longer, but that's not why I wear white. I'm not advertising to people that I don't have sex. But here in Thailand, if you see people who are wearing white every single day, you know that they're not having sex. So if you're interested in having sex with somebody, you would have sex with somebody who isn't meeting those criteria. And that makes it really easy for you. And the reason why the Buddha is teaching this is because one of the best things that you could ever have accomplished for yourself is getting to enlightenment, where your mind's completely peaceful, completely joyful, no longer experiencing any discontent feelings. So if you tried to lure somebody away from getting to enlightenment, you're causing harm to that person. And you're also causing harm to the wider community, because somebody getting to enlightenment, they would have deep wisdom about what it takes to get to enlightenment. And not only would they be able to get to enlightenment, but they would be able to help other people too. So if you lure somebody away from getting to enlightenment by choosing to have sex with them, that's going to cause harm. And of course, it's that person's decision of whether or not they choose to have sex or not. But you would like to just be sure that someone hasn't taken this vow of celibacy in order to choose to have sex with that person. And that's going to make sure you're not causing harm. Here, if an individual was already committed in other relationships, or if you were committed in a relationship and you chose to have sex outside of that relationship, that would be what the Buddha is talking about up here when he says, who have a husband, wife, or partner. And then he says, even with one who has been garlanded by a man, woman, or partner as a sign of engagement. Okay, so this is having sex outside of committed relationships. Or if other people have committed to a relationship and you choose to have sex with them, this is where you could get beat up, you could get murdered, your material possessions could be destroyed, you could get sexually transmitted diseases, you could have your reputation in the community destroyed. This is all the cause and effect of the natural law of Kamma if you choose to do those kinds of things. So that's why the Buddha is teaching this kind of thing. Then here I talk about human trafficking. That human trafficking is when someone's being forced to have sex, typically for money. If you went into that kind of environment and had sex, that's unchastity. And that person being forced to have sex, if you're entering into that environment, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. These are all things that would produce unwholesome results for you. Then in terms of paid services would be like someone actually is choosing to do this on their own. They're not being forced to do it, but they're choosing to do this, like as a sexual worker. And in this situation, it's the same kind of things, that this is unchastity. And now in that situation, going into that kind of environment, you can get beat up, you can get murdered, you can get robbed, you can get sexually transmitted diseases. These are all things that can occur. Notice that the Buddha doesn't say anything here about same-gender relationships. That's because there isn't any harm in same-gender relationships, right? If you have two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex, they're not causing harm to anyone. If it's a man and a woman, or a man and a female, they're two loyal, loving, consenting adults choosing to have sex. The Buddha was aware of this during his lifetime because he essentially talks about it in his teachings, but he doesn't share anything in terms of teachings. He just observes that this is what's happening, and he lets his students know that this is what's happening. But when he talks about this natural law of Kamma, he doesn't include it in there because there's no harm. And if you understand the universal truth of impermanence, then you know that it's not possible for everybody to be interested in having sex with the opposite gender. If every man and every female had sex with the opposite gender, that would be permanence. But we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that things are constantly changing. So some men are going to be interested in having sex with women, but some men are going to be interested in having sex with men. And same thing with women. Some are going to be interested in having sex with men. Some are going to be interested in having sex with women. And that's completely normal. It's been happening since the beginning of time, but there's no harm if it's loyal, loving, consenting adults. So that's why the Buddha didn't include it here. And I like to point out that this is how wise this individual is. 2,500 years ago, he understood that same-gender relationships doesn't cause any harm. Today, we have people in the world that don't understand that. And due to their craving for permanence, when they talk about or they're involved or they see same-gender relationships, they're not getting what they want, and now their anger is arising. They get angry and bitter and harsh, and then that's coming from their ignorance or their unknowing of true reality. But you can have wisdom, to know that if you're a person who prefers same-gender relationships, or you know someone who does, it's completely normal. You're not doing anything wrong. If other people get angry because you have a same-gender relationship, you're not causing their anger. They're causing it themselves. Okay? Same thing with transgender individuals. This is completely normal, and it's explained through the teachings of the Buddha. That if you understand that the body is one thing and the mind is something completely different, the idea that the mind is going to come into this body and identify as exactly the same gender as the sexual organs, this would be permanence if that happened for every single person. If every single person who had male sexual organs or female sexual organs identified with that gender as being their own gender, that would be permanence. And we understand the universal truth of impermanence, that it's not possible for everybody's mind to identify with the same gender as their sexual organs. And this is just normal because of the natural laws, right? And if you understand the cycle of rebirth, then you understand that we've had many different existences before this. So somebody could have been a female, and now their mind ends up in a male body in their next life. And now, even though the sexual organs are male, their mind identifies as a female. And it can happen in the other way too, right? This is completely normal. But unfortunately, there's people that don't understand this. So because of their craving, because of their anger, because of their ignorance, they get angry when other people say that, hey, I don't identify with the same sexual organs as the body. Hey, if that person identifies as a male or a female, up to them, right? It's their life. It's their choice. It's not up to us to tell other people how they should or shouldn't think. So transgender individuals are completely normal if you understand the universal truth of impermanence and the cycle of rebirth. Okay? Sometimes people ask me about masturbation, because they're sometimes taught that this is all wrong, it's immoral, you should never masturbate, and all these kinds of things. But it really comes down to how you're using masturbation. You could use masturbation in a beneficial way that's going to help you, but you could also use it in a way that's harmful. So the ultimate goal is, if you're eliminating your sensual desire, and that's what you're working to eliminate, the masturbation can actually be helpful. So let me give you some examples. Let's just say somebody was listening to this talk and they have like 5 boyfriends or girlfriends, or 10 boyfriends or girlfriends. And they're like, oh my goodness, the Buddha is wise. Like, I should only have one. Like, why do I have 5 or 10? This isn't really wise of me. And now they would like to go down to 1 boyfriend or 1 girlfriend. Well, maybe they have this really high sexual craving. And in order to get down to 1 boyfriend or 1 girlfriend, they need to use a little bit of masturbation along the way in order to eliminate some of their sexual craving and get to just 1 boyfriend or 1 girlfriend. This could be really wise. This could be really helpful. Or say somebody was interested in raping somebody and going out and forcing someone to have sex, but they choose to masturbate instead. This could be really helpful. This could be really beneficial for them. So masturbation could actually be helpful in some situations. But if someone was masturbating excessively, like 10, 15, 20 times a day, and it's increasing their sensual desire, this can be harmful to the mind. It can be harmful to the body too, if somebody was doing it that excessively, right? So masturbation can actually be helpful in some situations, and it can also be harmful. If you know anything about a dam, like a physical structure that holds back water, these are usually multi-million-dollar projects that they build in order to protect a town from flooding or some water. What they do is, as the water's building up in the dam, if it's putting a lot of pressure on the dam that can destroy the dam, the way that they solve this is they open up the dam and they let the water out of the dam. And then when the pressure goes down, they then close the dam. And now they've protected the dam. Well, the same thing's going to happen as you're going through life, where maybe you had a sexual partner for a period of time and now you don't have a sexual partner anymore. You might notice a lot of pressure building up in the mind, that your mind just really is craving sex a whole lot. Well, if you use a little bit of masturbation, that can kind of let the pressure out, right? And now maybe you could go a week or 2 or 3 or a month or 2 or 3 without having sex, right? So masturbation could actually be helpful in some situations. Sex with animals is one of those rare things that is black and white, that I imagine if someone did this, they could experience disease or illness or harm, because an animal can't consent to giving sex to a person. So if someone chose to do this, I imagine it would cause a lot of difficulties and a lot of harm for them. Sometimes people ask me about pornography. Pornography is something where the mind is really interested in intimacy, but an individual will go down this path of pornography, looking at images, whether video or pictures of sexual acts, and then this kind of elicits certain feelings or thoughts within their own mind. And oftentimes masturbation will accompany this. What this person is typically interested in is intimacy with a partner, but when you go down into this fantasy world with pornography, even when you try to come out of that, it's kind of hard to experience satisfaction with a real life partner again, because your mind has been so deep down into this fantasy world. If somebody was interested in having intimacy with a partner, I would suggest you go in that direction rather than towards pornography, because your mind's going to get addicted to this and you're going to be holding on to it, and it really pollutes the mind and it makes it really difficult to come out of that. So it's better to go towards an actual partner if that's what you're interested in. So do you guys have any questions on this one? This one is also craving, anger, and ignorance, right? It helps you to be able to understand how to practice having sex in a non-harmful way. Okay, so let's go to the next one. This one's very straightforward. This one is abandoning false speech, refraining from false speech, a truth speaker, one to be relied on, trustworthy, dependable, not a deceiver of the world. So what the Buddha is teaching you is that it's unwise to tell falsehoods, to tell lies. And the reason why is because people aren't going to be able to see you as being trustworthy and dependable and loyal. So if you're in a personal, professional relationships and you're lying, people are going to discover those lies. And now you're going to find it hard to have a healthy and harmonious relationship, either personally or professionally. When your boss is getting ready to staff a new project, if they know that you lie, they're not going to staff you on that project, right? So you need to be trustworthy and dependable in all situations. This is not only going to help you with your relationships, but it's going to help your mind too. Because if you've ever done a lot of lying in life, you probably remember that you had to keep your lies straight, that you had to figure out, what did I say to this person versus what did I say to that person versus what did I say to this person? So how can you get to peace and joy within your own mind if your mind's obsessively trying to figure out what you said to one person versus another? So it would be wise to speak the truth in all situations. The Buddha understood this so well that I included this other teaching here where he's teaching his son, and he's saying that he doesn't even lie when he tells a joke. Now, sometimes people think the Buddha left his family and he never came back, but he actually did. He spent time with his son and his wife and his mother, which is ultimately his stepmother. All these people ended up coming and ordaining with him and getting to enlightenment. And here he's teaching his son, Rahula, that it would be unwise to lie even as a joke. You might not associate a Buddha as an individual who tells jokes, but a Buddha tells jokes. A Buddha is going to have a personality, right? They're going to have fun. An enlightened being is going to enjoy life. Sometimes when you see pictures of the Buddha, people are usually putting him in these very somber, positions like meditating or being very serious looking. But an enlightened being is going to have fun and enjoyment and cheerful. Their mind's going to be bright and radiant and uplifted. They're not going around being serious all day long, because who wants to hang out with that guy, right? You would like to be around people who are fun and interesting and humorous and have a good time. So a Buddha tells jokes, but the difference is that when they tell jokes, they tell the truth. They're not going to lie. Because if you can imagine a Buddha being in a class like this, teaching the truth about how to get to enlightenment, but on the side, they're actually lying, then the students wouldn't know whether or not to trust that person's words or not. So a Buddha is going to tell jokes that are the truth. They're also not going to be degrading and disparaging. Sometimes when we tell jokes in the unenlightened state, we're degrading and disparaging other people, and this is really unwise because that stuff's all going to come back to you. So the Buddha teaches you to tell wholesome jokes if you're going to tell jokes. And those jokes usually take a lot more effort and wisdom to put together, but they're funnier. People usually will laugh at them a lot more. And you might be challenged to figure out these kinds of jokes early on, but as your mind does this work to figure this out, you'll get more and more comfortable telling jokes that are the truth, and you'll see that it actually becomes easier and it's actually a lot more funny, and people will laugh at your jokes even more when you do that kind of thing because you've put more work into it. So do you guys have any questions on this one about telling the truth? Yeah. Could you get a microphone?
Yeah, the jokes. Do you know any?
Do I know any jokes? Yeah, I know lots of jokes.
Like enlightened ones.
Huh?
Enlightened ones.
Enlightened jokes?
Yeah.
I don't know. What kind of jokes do you want to hear?
Well, what you just described.
What's that?
What you just described, Buddha.
I usually tell jokes in the moment because then they're funnier, right? Like as we're doing things.
But when you tell jokes, they are clean and enlightened.
What's that?
When you tell jokes, they are enlightened jokes.
Jokes that are, you probably have jokes that an enlightened being would share, right? It's just a joke that isn't a lie, that isn't degrading and disparaging. You probably have jokes like that too.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, I'd like to know what your jokes are like.
Let's talk after class. There's Buddhist jokes that people tell. Would you like to hear one of those? Okay, so there's this, you guys may or may not understand this joke. It's a Buddhist joke, right? So let's just say there's a Buddhist coroner and they ended up getting fired from their job. And people are like, why'd the Buddhist coroner get fired from his job? Well, every time he filled out a birth certificate, or not a birth certificate, a death certificate, he kept putting the same cause of death. Like, well, what's the cause of death that he kept putting on the death certificate? He said the cause of death is birth. You understand? Because you were born, you had to die. That's like a teaching of the Buddha, right? So that's one of the Buddhist jokes. Or sometimes people say, what is permanent? Impermanence is permanent, right? That's like a little silly joke. So these are like little corny jokes, but there's other jokes that you can tell that are funnier, that are true, and but don't degrade people and stuff like that. Yeah.
What about sarcasm? Like, sarcasm is usually saying the opposite of what you're actually doing, but it's not harming anyone. It's just a joke. Like, so for example, like yesterday, there was an example that you were given that, like, that when you go to meditate, for example, you could just go into the office or you could go here, and like you used to go to the nursing room of your previous job, and you would just go and meditate there. But but if you, or sometimes you did it in the toilet, and you're just like sitting on the seat and just meditating because no one is going to come over there and say, hey, what are you doing in there? So the thought that came into my head the minute someone, like, if I was doing that and someone said, hey, what are you doing in there? I'm baking a cake. So if I respond like that, is that like, it's a sarcasm because I'm not baking a cake.
Yeah.
But it's just saying like, what do you think I'm doing in there?
Yeah, you would be lying in that situation.
Right.
You're not interested in lying. You would always be interested in telling the truth. And sometimes people ask me like, well, what am I supposed to do if like I'm in World War II and a Nazi soldier is chasing someone into my house and they're hiding under the bed and the soldier shows up to my house? Am I supposed to tell the truth and tell them that they're under my bed? Well, the answer is, of course, you're not going to tell them that they're under your bed, but there's ways to tell the truth where you're not telling everything you know. Right? If you're in a court of law or something like this, you need to tell everything you know, right? That's going to produce wholesome Kamma. But in a situation like this, where there's a soldier trying to kill this person hiding under my bed, I don't need to tell them everything I know. If a soldier comes up and says, hey, have you seen Rebecca? I'm like, oh, you're looking for Rebecca? We should go look at the bush over there. Let's go look in the bush and see if she's over there in the bush. Right? So I didn't lie. I just redirecting this person's mind somewhere else. So in this situation, you can still tell the truth without divulging everything you know. So this is where you become skillful. But something like that, sarcasm, it's typically a lie, or it's meant to kind of like dig somebody or turn their buttons a little bit. And this would be unwise in those situations. So you'll find that there's jokes that you can tell that don't have lies in them and that don't have digs on people and turn their buttons, but they can be funny and they can be interesting and you can have fun with it.
The opposite of it, what if you're on the receiving end? So you're not telling, but you're listening to it. So for example, just listening to comedy, like stand-up comedy that is a little politically incorrect, or it's just like, a lot of comedians, they just dig, and you're just listening to it and you've some things you find funny. Is that like...
Yeah, as long as you're not allowing your mind to be influenced by that, then it's not going to cause you any harm, right? Because I listen to comedians sometimes and they use profanity or they say racist things or stuff like this. I don't think that way. And I don't even laugh at those kinds of things. But the reason why I watch those kind of things is because it helps me to understand what people are talking about in society, because comedians will typically be talking about current events. So that's why I listen to comedians and those kinds of things. I don't necessarily agree with what they're saying, but it just helps to inform me about what people are talking about. But it doesn't influence my mind. I don't go outside saying racist things or belittling people or using profanity. So you can digest content like that, and still it's not harming you because you're not allowing it to influence your mind. Even sometimes people think like violent video games. They think like, oh, you should avoid that. Me and my son actually play pretty violent video games sometimes, but our mind's not influenced by it. You can see like my son, he never is angry or bitter or harsh or hostile towards people. He doesn't act out those things. It's just a game. We just play the game. We're not killing an actual being because that video game is not a living being. It's a pixels on the TV. So sometimes people think it's the video game that is causing the anger, and it's not the video game that's causing the anger. It's that if there's anger in the mind, that video game can arise it. But if you've eliminated your anger and hostility in your mind, you can actually play a violent video game and not have any kind of anger or frustration as part of that. So there's things like this in society that people are misunderstanding, that the more you understand these teachings, you'll see that you can do these kinds of things, like watching comedians and playing video games, and you'll be just fine. But you have to be observant of your own mind, and you have to be objective when you look at your own mind, because sometimes you can avoid looking at that thing that's coming up in your mind. Because if you notice that a violent video game is causing your anger to arise, it's wise to distance yourself from that for a period of time, train your mind to eliminate that anger. But then ultimately, if you ultimately decide to start playing that or listening to a comedian or things like that, you can do that without having it influence your mind. And that's just through training and discipline of the mind.
But for that moment, because humor is such a weird sort of a emotion or feeling that it just happens involuntarily. If something is funny, it's just funny. Mm-hmm. Even if it's like disparaging, or you just like it's a sarcastic thing, or like they're saying something racist, but it's just funny. So for example, if I'm Indian or someone, and there's tons of comedians who make like joke, and like a lot of Indians make Indian jokes about Indians or whatever. So I'm just fine if it's funny, it's funny. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. And you just laugh, but it's not like how you think. But like, I don't agree with it. If someone makes a like joke on Spanish people or Chinese people or whatever, like it might be funny for me, but it's not how I feel about them. Mm-hmm. So that's okay. Right.
Yeah. It's not about, I'm not here to tell you what's okay.
Saying that.
I'm not here to tell you what's okay or not okay. That's for you to decide. I'm here to teach you the natural law of Kamma, and then you practice accordingly however you think is best. But when you're watching something, if you find that it's funny and you choose to laugh, that's your choice. What you'll find is, as you train your mind in these teachings, you'll find that things that you once thought were funny are not funny anymore. Because there were things that I used to laugh at before that I would think is funny that I don't think is funny anymore, based on the way my mind is functioning. But I don't look down on the comedian just because they're choosing to say those things. It's just like, okay, well, that's what they said. And then you just move on, and it doesn't affect my mind, either positively or negatively.
Just one more quick follow-up on that. That applies to music as well? Because music is very powerful, like in terms of how it affects, your...
Yeah, you'll be able to listen to music as an enlightened being, but it won't cause your mind to have any particular feelings, right? Like now, if you listen to music, you might get really happy when you hear certain music. You might get sad when you hear other kind of music. And some people think that that's like good artistry, right? And that's how we kind of praise artists, that they were able to elicit some kind of emotion or feeling. But by the time you get to enlightenment, your mind won't go up and down based on something like music. But you'll be able to listen to music and your mind will just completely steady and stable. You'll probably just appreciate the artistry of the music as opposed to having your mind go up and down based on the music. Mm-hmm. Yep. Have another one? Yep. Your mic's not on yet.
The music again. Have you listened to some of this music? It can be really explicit. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? And sexual and everything. I mean, surely that's not good for you.
Yeah, you can listen to whatever you choose to listen to because it's your life, it's your own free will decisions, but your choices of what you choose to listen to might even change, right? So like when I was younger, I listened to a lot of really graphic music. Now I don't listen to that as much, but there's some people, like I listen to Eminem. Me and my son think that he's, we really enjoy his music, but of course he's talking about sometimes very explicit things. But I understand the art in it. And I understand that this is like a window into his life and how his mind thinks and the type of life that he used to once live. So my son listens to, things like this where they're talking about killing and drug dealing and stuff like this, because this can give you an appreciation and an understanding of other people's lives. Whereas if you block that stuff out, then you're turning a blind eye to it and you don't understand other people's lives and how they live. So just because you hear music doesn't mean that it needs to influence your mind in the way that you think and the way that you make decisions, because you're not going to create peace and joy in your life by blocking out the outside world. You're going to need to learn how, when I hear that music, I can maintain my contentedness and my peacefulness. Because if you're in a car and you're at a stoplight and there's a car next to you playing some music that you would prefer not to hear, if you get angry and frustrated, that's your own mind that's causing that. You can't block out the outside world. So you're going to hear music from other people at different times, and you can train your mind to be peaceful and joyful and content no matter what you're experiencing in day-to-day life. Okay, so let's go to this next one. This is the last one. This is the 5th precept. Here, this one is refraining from strong drink and sloth-producing drugs, substances that cause heedlessness, the basis for heedlessness. Well, when you study the words of the Buddha, as I mentioned to you, you need to investigate them, right? So if there's anything that's being shared that you don't understand, you're going to need to dive in and investigate. So if you're like me, when I came across this, I kind of had a feeling I knew what heedlessness meant, but I wasn't quite sure. So I investigated it, right? So if there's ever a time where you come across the teaching, investigate it and see what does that mean. Don't just assume that your understanding of it is the truth. So when I went and looked at it, this is what heedlessness means. It means careless, thoughtless, inattentive, uncalm, unaware, and unmindful. And what the Buddha is teaching you is that it'd be unwise to put a substance into the body that's promoting that aspect of the mind. Because if you're trying to make your way to enlightenment, you need to cultivate mindfulness. You need to cultivate awareness of mind. So if you're putting a substance into the body that's taking you in the opposite direction of that, you're walking in the opposite direction of enlightenment. So the Buddha encourages you to purge those types of substances so that you can maintain your mindfulness and awareness of mind. Because if your mind is heedless, you're more likely to kill, to steal, to have sexual misconduct, and to lie. If you go into a jail or a prison system and you ask those people why are they in jail, they'll tell you that they're there for murder or robbery or something like that. But if you're like, no, like, why are you really here? They'll tell you it's because of substances, about 80% of them. They'll say, I would have never killed that person if I wasn't high on that drug, or I would have never robbed that bank if I wasn't feeding a drug habit. So substances are going to promote all kinds of unwise decisions that are going to take your life in a direction that would be unwholesome for you. So you're going to need to look at each one of these individual substances in the world and figure out whether it's causing heedlessness or not. Because the Buddha taught in a timeless way, because he could have never imagined all the substances that we would have encountered or created. So he taught in a way that was timeless, that you could apply it to any point in time and any kind of new substances that were created. So we can take some of these substances. This isn't an exhaustive list, but we can take some of these and look at them and kind of figure out how we could potentially apply this precept. So something like marijuana. This is a plant that we know has medical benefits, but it can also be used for high or heedlessness as well. It just depends on how you're using it, right? Because there's been studies where there's been children that have like 20 seizures a day, and they give them a little bit of CBD oil on their tongue, and they don't have another seizure for like 6 months. right? So undoubtedly, this plant has medical benefits, but it can also be used to produce heedlessness too. And only you are going to know in what situation you're using it for. Typically, if people are looking for the medical benefits of this plant, they're going to be looking for a high CBD. There's two sides to the plant, CBD and THC. The CBD is the part that's the medical benefits, and the THC is the part that produces the high. So if you're looking for medical benefits, you're probably going to look for a high CBD, and you're probably going to ingest it as like an oil or edible. Whereas if you're looking for a high, you're going to go for the THC, and you might likely be smoking it, and that's going to cause harm to the lungs, right? So whether you use it for medical purposes or for a high, it's up to you, and you're going to need to discern that for yourself. But if you're using it for stress or anxiety or to sleep better or something like that, those aren't going to be solved by marijuana. The stress and the anxiety, that's being caused by craving, desire, attachment, and marijuana is not going to fix that. So as soon as you don't have marijuana in your system, the stress and anxiety is still going to be there. So it would be wise to be sure you have a valid medical reason if you're going to use something like marijuana. We know that cigarettes don't have any medical purpose. More and more people are figuring this out, but for a long time, people didn't understand. And that's why we saw a lot of lung cancer and throat cancers and things like this. So more and more people are getting away from cigarettes. So if you're interested in getting away from cigarettes, this is something that you could choose to do, and it's going to help your overall health of your body and your mind as well. If you were choosing to do something like this, where you're looking to get away from something that is unwise, I suggest you do it gradually. Like if I was smoking 20 cigarettes a day, I would go down to like 18 cigarettes for like a week or two. Let my body and my mind adjust to that. Then I would probably go down to like 15 cigarettes for like a week or two. And I would do that until my body and mind adjust to that. And then I would go down a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. And eventually it's going to be like 1 cigarette a day, and then maybe a day without cigarettes. 1 cigarette a day without cigarettes. And it might be 1 day with a cigarette, 2 or 3 days without a cigarette. Things like this. You just gradually ease away from it. And this is a more sustainable choice. And your body and your mind will appreciate this a lot more. No matter what it is, whether it's cigarettes or any other thing that's maybe unwholesome in your life, you can gradually eliminate it like this. And you can do the same thing with wholesome things. You can gradually increase them. So like if you are interested in going to a plant-based food supply, rather than go cold turkey on that, you can just gradually implement that. Maybe 1 meal that's plant-based, 1 meal that's meat, 1 that's plant-based, 1 that's meat. And you just gradually increase it like that, because you're going to need to learn new recipes. You're going to need to have new restaurants, new suppliers. It's going to take you time to find all these things. So if you do these things gradually, your mind will really appreciate that, because it doesn't like change, right? The mind doesn't like impermanence. So if you went from smoking 20 cigarettes a day to 0, your body and your mind is going to revolt on you. So if you do it slowly, it's a more sustainable change for you. You're going to need to pay attention to your prescription medications, because even some of these can produce heedlessness. Whereas if you're prescribed a medicine from a doctor, you would like to research that. If you just blindly take medicine that a doctor is giving you, in my opinion, this is unwise. You would like to research each individual medication. And if you see that a particular medication they're prescribing is addictive, you could ask your doctor, hey, is there another prescription? And in some cases, there's going to be another prescription, and they'll give you something different that isn't addictive. But some cases, it's like the only medicine for that particular situation. And if you know that and you have that wisdom, that's very helpful, because you know that, okay, I'm going to take this for 10 days and then I'm going to get off of it as soon as possible, so that the body and the mind doesn't get addicted to it, because that's good information for you to have. So pay attention to your prescription medicines. Caffeine is actually a stimulant. It's a drug. Your mind will get addicted to it. What it does is it produces a high, like it gives you more energy, right? It's not the same high as like cocaine or something like that, but it does lift the mind up to have more energy. But then you're going to drop back off from that. By the time you get to enlightenment, you'll have sustainable energy all day long, where your energy doesn't go up and down. But if you rely on caffeine for that, you're never allowing your mind to develop the natural energy all the way through your day. So if you get rid of caffeine, it'll actually help promote improved qualities in your mind. And if you decided to do this, you're probably going to go through withdrawal. Just like a heroin person who's addicted to heroin or like cocaine, they're going to go through withdrawal. When you get rid of caffeine, you might notice you have shakes. You might notice you have headaches. You might notice dry mouth and things like this. But this caffeine is promoting an overactive mind, and you would like to purge these kinds of things so you can have more clarity in your mind. When or if you ever choose to do that, it's your choice. But I just let you know that that's going to help improve the condition of your mind. You need to even pay attention to sugar. If you take that in excess, it can produce a high. We kind of learned that as a child, and most of us kind of like went away from that. But you'll need to even pay attention to that kind of thing. Some people will tell you that psychedelic substances are going to help you to get to enlightenment. This isn't actually true. Psychedelic substances do kind of promote this introspection within the mind where you can look inward, but it's only because of the substance that the mind is able to do this. You would like to get to the point where you develop this naturally because you're going to need to be introspective at all times during your day in order to get to enlightenment. If you can only be introspective when you take a psychedelic substance, then that means you can't be introspective all throughout your day. So it's not like I can be talking to my mom, having a difficult conversation, and I can say, hey, Mom, let me go drop this hit of LSD real quick, and I'll be back and talk to you in a minute. This is a really hard conversation. Let me go get this psychedelic substance on board, and then we can have a conversation. You're not going to be able to do that, right? So you need to be introspective at all times during your day. And if you rely on a psychedelic substance, it's not going to be able to accomplish that. Your mind's not going to be able to develop that naturally. The way that I think about psychedelic substances is it's kind of like if you were walking down the street doing window shopping and you were looking into the stores and you saw this beautiful product inside the store, like a beautiful handbag or something like this. And it's like, wow, that's a beautiful handbag. I'd really like to go touch it and feel it and maybe purchase it. But you can't because you're chained down to the sidewalk outside. Whereas if you take psychedelic substances, you can kind of see a little bit of what it's like to be introspective, but you can never really have that for yourself because your mind is relying on the psychedelic substance. Whereas if you purge that from your life, you'll be able to develop that naturally within your mind, and you'll be able to be introspective at all times during your day. So this is the fifth precept. And again, I don't have every substance listed here because the Buddha is speaking timeless, right? So if there's any substance now and long into the future, if you understand this word heedlessness, you can apply it to any substance that you might come across and decide for yourself whether or not you'd like to ingest that substance or not. So do you guys have any questions on this?
Does social media categorized as the new substance?
This isn't a substance that causes heedlessness because you're not putting a substance in the body. But with social media, people's minds can get attached to it. You can have a craving, desire, attachment for it. And now when you're holding on to it, if you have it, you feel pleasant feelings. If you don't, you feel, sad or frustrated or angry. But the problem isn't the social media. The problem is the craving, desire, attachment in the mind. So you can actually use social media successfully without a craving, because I'm in social media all the time, helping people learn the teachings and stuff like that, but I'm not attached to it. I can do my little thing and I can put it down and walk away. The problem isn't that people are using social media, it's that they can't put it down. That's the problem. The mind is craving and it's holding on, it's clinging, it can't put it down. So there's ways to train your mind to be able to pick it up and put it down, and pick it up and put it down, and feel comfortable with that. And then that way you can use it from the middle way, where you're not using it exhaustively and with craving, desire, attachment, but you're also not completely out of the world and non-interactive as well. So some people choose to not be involved in social media because sometimes people think that pushing social media away is going to solve their problem. That's the aversion. But you can learn how to participate in social media but not have anger and frustration. But that comes through training of the mind. And usually in order to do this, you need to go away from social media for a period of time and train your mind to let go, but then you can slowly reintegrate it. So I went away from social media for a good 3 years. Not that everyone has to do it that long. You could probably go away from it for 3 months, 6 months, or even a year, and then kind of slowly reintegrate it into your life, and don't allow the mind to get craving, desire, attachment now that you've integrated it, that you've first gotten away from it, and now you slowly integrate it, and you're not allowing the mind to cling or crave for it.
Thanks.
Okay, so I think that's everything. So we're going to take a break here for lunch. It's basically about 12:30. If you guys would like to come back at 2 o'clock, I'm going to teach you guys walking meditation. This is a meditation that's really good for an overactive mind. If you're noticing a lot of energy or overactivity in the mind, I'm going to teach it to you. It'll take me all of about 10 minutes to teach it to you. And then I'm going to give you guys a chance to do it here at the temple where you guys can do walking meditation. And then we'll have a conversation afterwards to kind of see what questions you guys have. So enjoy your lunch, and perhaps I'll see you guys at 2 o'clock. Okay? Sawadee Kap. Sawadee Kap.